Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations episode number 93. I'm your host, Joe Hannan, Joe from Jersey, the show where I contribute to entropy and you listen along gleefully. Before we get into anything, this episode of BJJ Meditations is sponsored by Outlier Database. Outlier Database is the ultimate analytical tool for no-gi jiu-jitsu. It's a tag searchable database that allows you to see how principles, concepts, and techniques are applied at the highest levels of grappling. I use Outlier Database as a supporting tool for any jiu-jitsu instructional, using the instructional for technical study and Outlier Database for understanding practical application. So right now, our curriculum next month will be, no, it's a weird curriculum. At the school, it's a weird curriculum because we have collar sleeve, which of course is not no-gi applicable. So we're going to be doing a dive on leg locks in the no-gi classes, and things get complicated in the no-gi classes because we have some beginners classes. So in those classes, we're going to be focusing exclusively on the nuances of the straight ankle lock. And right now I'm going deep in my study on that. And I'm sort of tag teaming Lachlan Giles' submeta with Outlier Database to understand the technical principles behind making an efficient ankle lock and also seeing how it works in the highest levels of the sport. That is how I'm using Outlier Database right now in my current study. It's hugely edifying, I find, to use it in that way, and I think you'll find it that way too. So right now you can sign up for Outlier Database today at outlierdb.com and use the promo code BJJMed to take 50% off your first month's membership. That's outlierdb.com and promo code BJJMed. That's BJJMED. Link is also in our show notes. And of course, thank you to the man, Jake Luigi, and Outlier Database for supporting the podcast. Yeah, so I guess before we get into the meat of this episode, which I will be calling the coachability paradox, I want to talk a little bit about what I just mentioned, like curriculum-wise, what's going on at the school. So I switched things up a little bit for March because we have Jonathan Thomas coming in on April 6th to do a seminar on collar sleeve. Hugely respect Jonathan Thomas as a teacher and a thinker within the sport. And I think his collar sleeve work is beautiful. He's also going to be showing connections, applications of collar sleeve plus matrix and crab ride. So that's shaping up to be a great seminar. Obviously open to any and all, not just exclusive to our students. So if the landing page is ready, I'll drop in a link to that in our show notes in case any of you are interested in coming by. Would love to see you on the mats. So yeah, we can't do collar sleeve and no-gi. I had to shuffle some things up, and I want to teach leg locks a bit differently than we have in the past. First and foremost with this sort of understanding of how to train these things safely. And I say this kind of agnostically. Like, I'm not a huge leg lock guy. I enjoy leg locks, but it's not something that's a huge component of my game. I think you have to be conscious of these things. If you're not present to them, you're kind of proceeding at your own peril. Certainly been leg locked my fair share of times, but mostly my jiu-jitsu has focused on understanding these things, not from an application based sense, but just from an avoidance based sense. Like I know how to stay out of them. It's not really a gunfight I want to get into. But now as a black belt and as the head instructor of our school, it's like, okay, well, this is a gunfight I got to get into. I need to understand these things deeper and with greater nuance if I want to teach them well. So starting the beginner classes off with a straight ankle lock, just because from an IBJJF standpoint, it's legal from white belt on up. But also there are just a lot of foundational principles to the ankle lock that translate to some of the other leg locks. Obviously, it's not a pure translation, like the defenses are totally different, as you all know, etc. But I think it's a good starting point, especially when we're looking at setups and entanglements. So we're going to focus on that exclusively. But I don't think I ever really got an explicit lesson in how to train these things safely. And I've been making my way through Craig Jones's Z-Guard instructional, which I mentioned on the last episode, which is well worth the money, by the way. And he has this great sort of segment sandwiched between lessons on the Choi bar, where he's talking about how to train arm bars safely in the gym in such a way where you're not generating false positives and you're creating opportunities to train the escapes from a technical standpoint. And it all hinges on this implicit trust between training partners that both partners understand what makes the joint lock work. They know to sort of go to end range and not go a millimeter further. And there's trust that the partner's not going to push it a millimeter further. So it emphasizes control, heavy emphasis on control before applying the submission. And I think it's sort of this magic recipe for how to train these things safely. And he briefly touches on an application to leg locks, but I think the translation is quite direct. We need to understand how these things operate. We need to understand how to navigate them safely. And we need to have mutual trust that sort of everyone training leg locks has that shared sense of understanding. So that's sort of what I'm aspirationally pushing on the students this month. I'll report back at the end of the month as to how well it goes. But obviously this is like anytime leg locks come up in any curriculum, it merits a high level of tension and attention, and I suppose tension too to some degree, but not on the joint itself, but actually, yes, on the joint itself. Anyway, it merits a high level of attention and consideration because obviously the consequences of these injuries are a bit higher than some of the other ones. So if any of you have any input or suggestions on how you sort of navigate this dynamic in your school, I'd love to hear about it. You can, of course, email me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com, but that's sort of what's on my brain as we proceed into this episode. The other thing that's on my brain is the state of my upper respiratory tract. My house is just being crushed by whatever sort of bullshit is circulating right now in daycares across America. My wife is extremely pregnant and obviously don't want her to be sick, but she is. I'm feeling kind of shitty too. And just kind of dealing with that, working our way through sickness plus life with small child, and trying to sort of incorporate all the lessons I've learned from being hurt these past few months. For example, last Friday night of the month at the school, it's Friday when I'm recording this, we're going to be doing this new thing we're calling Fight Club, stealing from Alex Eklund of Master Skya, where it's just going to be open hard training for, pretty much an hour on Friday nights and then some sort of team building, going out for some food afterward. And I've been laying off the mats all week to not infect anybody and to also just try and get better for tonight. And I still feel like shit. And I don't think I'm going to be training tonight, both because I don't want to get anyone sick and also because I don't want to break my broken ass even further. So lessons learned, trying to integrate these things from the knee injury. But anyway, to the heart of the matter here, I've been thinking a lot about this paradox that's sort of inherent to coaching and coachability. I'll say this on a higher level. I've been thinking about collar sleeve, for example, and I've been watching some of John Thomas's old instructionals on the subject to sort of prepare both for teaching it this month and for getting the students ready for his appearance at the school. And he makes this really great point in one of his instructionals where he doesn't say it in this way exactly, but collar sleeve works at its best because it's perfectly executed tension of opposites. And you're constantly sort of oscillating the tension between pushing and pulling, between arms and feet, hands and feet, and that's sort of what keeps your opponent stuck in this guard. It's this perfectly balanced tension of opposites. And when we're talking about paradox, that's essentially what we're talking about. It's this dynamic tension of opposites, right? And we tend to think of jiu-jitsu in terms of static positions, but nothing is static. Like jiu-jitsu is what's happening between all of those things, abstractions that we call positions. So there's this paradoxical nature to the practice of jiu-jitsu itself, and there's also this paradoxical nature to the coaching and the study of jiu-jitsu too. Like we just cannot escape paradox, and this is not unique to jiu-jitsu. This is everywhere. And it's possibly never been more apparent than right now in our general cultural landscape. I thought we had kind of seen the height of this during the COVID-19 pandemic, but I feel like that was just a warm-up act. It was like, like the doors opening for The Who or something like that. Maybe the other way around, whichever band you prefer. Anyway, there's this paradox inherent to coaching in jiu-jitsu as well. Like I was reflecting on this a bit earlier this week. I think that as a sort of an amateur athlete my entire life, anything I wanted to develop some modicum of skill at, I had to work really hard at. Like I'm not particularly well coordinated or anything like that. I don't have a ton of natural athleticism. So everything was a struggle. And I think if that's the case for you and you want to get better, you sort of have to make yourself coachable. You have to make yourself receptive to feedback. And I think it's kind of a necessary thing in order to progress, like, especially if you want to progress efficiently. There are certainly times when I've been trying to master something and no amount of coaching will do. I kind of just have to experience it in my own weird way and progress accordingly. But there were times when I was able to make myself exceptionally coachable and sort of jumpstart that process. But that got me thinking, okay, is this necessarily a good thing? In some sense, yeah, it's a good thing if you're moving closer to your objectives of enhancing your performance. But I think sort of a side effect of being coachable is this diminishment of centeredness, a diminishment of your sense of yourself as the learner within the learning process. Like, this is something that Josh Waitzkin would call, your central locus point. So for example, Josh would be the first to tell you that, like, as a chess player, he was an attacker. He had a very strong sense of offense, and that was integral to who he is. It comes across in pretty much all the domains of his life. He's going to lean forward. He's going to be pursuing the attack. There are some chess players who are more containment focused or prophylactically focused. That is not Josh at all. He knew this about himself, and eventually, as he matured and moved through chess and other arts, he was able to learn one from the other. Like, as an attacker, he could sort of learn the prophylaxis style of chess, but it was always through this central locus point, this deep embodied knowledge of who he was, what he valued. And I sometimes wonder if overemphasizing coachability diminishes this idea of the central locus point. And then, like, the flip side of that is, and we've all sort of encountered this, I think, as coaches and students, is we get this really hubristic student who overestimates their abilities or their solidity. For example, they let's use a jiu-jitsu example. Like, at blue belt, they think of themselves as, my entire game is going to be built around deep half guard. And, like, maybe it will be, but I think it pays, especially at that point in your journey as a blue belt, to be a bit agnostic and open-minded about these things. Agnostic in the sense that you're open to the possibility that you might be wrong. The foundation of your game might be X guard, it might be something else entirely, or the foundation of your game may shift every 5 to 10 years, as I'm experiencing right now. The foundation of my game was something else entirely when I was a purple belt. It's changing right now just because my body is changing. So there might be this overconfidence in the sense of solidity of your central locus point. I mean, I think identity also kind of plays into this hugely. We tend to think of ourselves as, I am the X guard player, but we're actually many things, and those things are constantly changing. And so that's sort of the side of it from the student's perspective. But there's also, I think it's important that we look at this from the vector of the coach as well, because all coaches have their shit. All parents have their shit. My wife and I were just talking about this, how sort of the unfulfilled ambitions or wishes of the parent can get passed on to the child. The same thing is true for coaches. And this is something that I think coaches are present to or not present to degrees. Some have a handle on this, some don't. And I don't pretend to have sort of the magic recipe for how to have a handle on this. Like, I'm a novice coach. I'm trying to figure this out for myself and trying not to fuck up any of my students in the process. But I think all of us, because we're all humans, we have aspects of ourselves that are underdeveloped or unfulfilled. And there's this very real human tendency to not be present to what's in our shadow and sort of displace it onto other people. So whenever we're interacting with a coach, I'm saying this to my students right now, like, check me on this. If I'm telling you something, you should be asking yourself, is this some unfulfilled aspect of my coach that is being foisted on me? In an ideal world, you're asking yourself that, the coach is asking themselves that, and there's sort of this ongoing feedback loop where everybody is kind of checking each other. The watchmen are being watched, and we're all progressing towards something bigger and better. But that's going to be happening to degrees of success with coaches, just like it's going to be happening to degrees of success with students. So we need to be sort of present to this. And I think this is kind of showing up in some interesting ways right now in the different philosophies of athletic learning. right. Like, and I think this ties back to identity. Like, we have these coaches who are very much locked into, like, I am an ecological style coach, or I am an constraints led approach style coach, or I'm a traditional style coach, and we're going to drill. Like, people are sort of forming camps right now in jiu-jitsu around these things and planting their flags in these camps and having some pretty intense, in some cases, identity-based discussions around these things. And I also wonder how that ultimately pans out for students. I wonder how or what is sort of some of the displaced, unreconciled shit in the coach's psyche and mind that is being foisted on the students in these debates. I think and it's unfortunate that we are getting so locked in from an identity standpoint to these things, because I think there's so much signal in the discussion around what we're uncovering about how people learn. But we also need to be open to the possibility that what we think right now could be completely wrong in 5 years. That's the nature of discovery. So, as a coach, I'm constantly thinking to myself too, like, okay, right now, these are the truths that I hold in terms of what works and what doesn't as a coach. But what about 5 years from now? And what about 5 years ago? What did I believe then to be true that I no longer believe to be true? And how might that pan out in the future? And yeah, it's just a fucking exhausting thought exercise. But this is the nature of human existence, I think. You're either thinking about these things or you're living them out unconsciously. And people think we're just learning jiu-jitsu or we're just teaching jiu-jitsu, but the import of what we're doing, what we're saying, the value we're delivering or not delivering is so much bigger than that. And I think this transcends jiu-jitsu. I think this is the same thing that I'm talking about right now within the dynamics of a jiu-jitsu school are happening in every human interaction right now. And we can either be present to them or not. And obviously, where I sort of fall on that side of the discussion. But that's all I've got for you this week. That's what's on my weird little brain. Thank you for tuning in. And thanks again to our sponsor, Outlier Database. Once more, you can use the promo code BJJ Med to take 50% off your first month's membership. That's OUTLIERDB.com, promo code BJJMED. If it's live, I will include the link to the John Thomas seminar in our show notes. Also, I will include the link to the book club number 4. It's always going to be the second to last Sunday of the month. But if that landing page is live, I will also include a link to that in our show notes. It's been great having a few people not affiliated with Princeton BJJ in those book club discussions. If that's something that is of interest to you, would love to have you come. Just sign up and I'll email you the Zoom information before we go live. But thank you very much for listening, folks. This podcast is just it's a labor of love for me. I got a beautiful email from a longtime listener earlier this week. And I think I'll probably talk a little bit about it on the next episode because I'm still kind of formulating my thoughts about it. But it's always great to hear from you. Please feel free to email me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com and I will try to get back to you. Oh, last thing. My good buddy Diego of Power Trip. Power Trip is live. It's probably going to launch. The print edition will launch prior to publication of this episode. I will also include a link to purchase your copy in the show notes. There's also an option, a bundle option for a really sweet rash guard, a first edition rash guard, and some additional little tidbits that you can buy too, like bookmarks, things of that nature. Everything is gorgeous. I'm so stoked to get my hands on this beautiful print product. And I'm amazed to see this thing finally come to life, because this is sort of, in my mind, the heart and soul of what our sport is all about. It's this vibrant community, and it's this commitment to sort of living an examined life through this sport. Because so few of us can be like world champions, right? And not to detract anything from the world champions who might be listening to this episode, like you're what's moving the entire sport forward, and I tip my hat to you. But I think that's the real value proposition for the rest of us, and for you too. I'm sure you're getting a lot out of it beyond being the dynamic edge of the sport. That's what it's all about. And it's awesome to see a tangible product that embodies that sense of community. Hats off to Diego and the rest of the Power Trip gang. Love you guys. Can't wait to get you back on the show, and we will talk next week.